The smoke billowed black against the Montana sky as Hannah Newsom fell to her knees, her once pristine calico dress now smeared with soot and despair. What had been her family's homestead just hours before was now nothing more than smoldering timbers and ash. The year was 1876, and Hannah had lost everything: her parents to fever last winter, and now her home to vengeful flames. "Pa built this place with his own 2 hands," she whispered, sifting the still warm ashes through her trembling fingers. The last embers glowed faintly, then died in her palm, much like her hopes for the future. Hannah didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over her sobs, didn't notice the tall figure dismounting from the chestnut stallion until his shadow fell across her. She looked up through tears to see a man silhouetted against the setting sun, broad-shouldered, trail-worn, with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Miss, you shouldn't be out here alone," he said, voice deep but gentle. "These parts ain't safe after dark." Hannah wiped her face with the back of her hand. "What does it matter? There's nothing left for me here." The stranger crouched beside her, his spurs jingling softly. His face came into view weathered and sun-browned, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a jawline shadowed with stubble. He couldn't have been more than 30. "There's still fire in you yet," he said, nodding toward her clenched fist where a tiny ember still glowed. "Sometimes that's all a person needs to start over." Hannah stared at him, this mysterious cowboy who spoke with such certainty. "Who are you?" "Zachary Zimmerman," he replied, offering his hand. "Most folks call me Zach." The sun dipped below the horizon as Hannah told Zach what had happened, how she'd gone to town for supplies, only to return and find her home ablaze. She suspected the Callahan brothers, local cattle barons who'd been pressuring her to sell her land for months. "You got anywhere to stay tonight?" Zach asked when she'd finished. Hannah shook her head. "The nearest neighbor is 10 miles, and I can't make it to town before dark." "I've got a camp set up in the grove yonder," Zach said, nodding toward a stand of cottonwoods. "Nothing fancy, but there's food and shelter. You're welcome to it while I ride for the marshal." Hannah hesitated. Taking shelter with a stranger went against everything her father had taught her about propriety, but the alternative was spending the night in the open with only the ashes of her former life for company. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Zach's expression softened. "My ma used to say helping folks in need wasn't a choice, it was an obligation." He held out his hand again. "Come on, Miss Newsom. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure what comes next." Hannah looked once more at the ruins of her home, then placed her hand in his. Zachary's camp was modest but well-ordered: a small fire, a coffee pot, and a bedroll beneath a simple canvas shelter. He busied himself adding wood to the fire while Hannah settled on a log nearby, exhaustion making her limbs heavy. "Hope you don't mind jerky and beans," he said, stirring something in a small pot. "Trail food ain't fancy, but it keeps a body going." Hannah watched him move around the campsite with easy efficiency. "You're not from around here, are you, Mr. Zimmerman?" "Just Zach," he corrected. "And no, I'm passing through. Was a Texas Ranger for a spell, then scouted for the Army. Now I'm heading to Montana Territory to look at some land." "What brought you by my place?" Zach paused in his work. "Heard gunshots earlier, came to investigate." "By the time I got there, whoever set the fire was long gone." Hannah's hands clenched in her lap. "The Callahans, has to be. They've wanted our water rights since Pa first staked his claim." Zach handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Tell me about these Callahans." As the night grew deeper, Hannah told Zach about the brothers Wilford and Preston Callahan, who owned the largest cattle operation in the county. When smaller ranchers refused to sell, accidents seemed to happen: fences cut, cattle scattered, and now, apparently, homes burned. "The marshal won't help," Hannah said bitterly. "He's in their pocket like most everyone in town." Zach's expression hardened. "I've seen men like the Callahans before. They take what they want because no one stands against them. What can one woman do against men like that?" "More than you might think," Zach replied, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Especially a woman with fire in her." The next morning, Hannah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Zach had already been up for hours, she realized, watching him move quietly around the campsite. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. Hope you don't mind, but I rode back to what's left of your place at first light, found this buried under some boards. He handed her a small metal box, her mother's jewelry case, singed but intact. Hannah took it with trembling hands, opening it to find the few precious mementos her mother had left her: a cameo brooch, a pair of pearl earrings, and her wedding band. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more past the lump in her throat. "Also found tracks," Zach continued, his voice matter of fact as he poured her coffee. "3 riders headed toward town. One horse had a distinctive shoe missing a nail on the right fore." Hannah accepted the steaming cup. "How do you know all this?" "Tracking's what kept me alive as a ranger," he said simply. "Now eat up, we're heading to town." "Town, I can't," Hannah gestured at her soot-stained dress. Zach rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out a clean, if somewhat wrinkled, shirt. "It'll be big, but it'll cover the worst of it." "Unless you'd rather stay here." Hannah thought of the Callahans, probably celebrating their victory over breakfast at the hotel. Anger surged through her, burning away some of her grief. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes." An hour later, they rode into Pinewood, Hannah on her mare that had thankfully been grazing far from the house during the fire, and Zach on his chestnut stallion. The small frontier town was just waking up, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks and freight wagons making early deliveries. Hannah was painfully aware of her appearance, wearing her own skirt but with Zach's shirt belted over it, her hair hastily braided, and her face showing the strain of her ordeal. Still, she held her head high as they dismounted in front of the marshal's office. "Let me do the talking," Zach murmured as they entered. Marshal Thornton, a balding man with a substantial belly straining his vest buttons, looked up from his desk with annoyance that quickly changed to wariness when he saw Zach's confident stride. "Can I help you, stranger?" Zach removed his hat. "Zachary Zimmerman, former Texas Ranger. I'm escorting Miss Newsom to report a crime." The marshal's eyes flicked to Hannah, then back to Zach. "What kind of crime?" "Arson," Hannah said before Zach could answer. "Someone burned my home to the ground yesterday." Marshal Thornton's expression barely changed. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Newsom. You got any proof?" "We found tracks," Zach said evenly. 3 riders, 1 horse with a distinctive shoe. I'd be mighty interested to look at the Callahan brothers' mounts." The marshal's face flushed. "Now see here, you can't just ride into my town and start throwing accusations at respected citizens." "Respected?" Hannah stepped forward. "They've been threatening homesteaders for months. They told my father they'd run him off his land one way or another." "That's not evidence," Thornton blustered. "And even if I was inclined to look into it, which I ain't, given your lack of proof, the Callahans ain't even in town, rode out to their north pasture yesterday and won't be back for days." Zach's eyes narrowed. "That's so." "Then whose horses are those tied up outside the hotel with the Circle C brand?" The marshal's expression confirmed what they suspected, even before he fumbled for words. Hannah felt a surge of gratitude toward Zach, whose sharp eyes had caught what she might have missed. "I'll look into it," Thornton finally muttered. "Come back later." "We'll wait," Zach said, settling into a chair and stretching out his long legs. "Take your time, Marshal." Outside the marshal's office, Hannah let out a shaky breath. "He won't do anything. He's terrified of them." "I know," Zach said quietly, "but now he knows we know, and that's a start." He scanned the street thoughtfully. "You have friends in town." Hannah thought of Mrs. Patterson, who ran the millinery shop and had always been kind to her. "A few." "Good. We need to get you proper clothes and a place to stay while we sort this out." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "Mr. Zimmerman, Zach, you've been more than kind, but I can't ask you to fight my battles." Zach's expression was determined. "You didn't ask. Besides, I was heading to Montana anyway. Might as well make sure justice is done here first." There was something in his blue eyes that made Hannah's heart skip a steadiness, a certainty that had been missing from her life for too long. "Thank you," she said simply, "Mrs." Patterson welcomed Hannah with open arms and horrified exclamations over her story. Within an hour, Hannah was bathed and dressed in a borrowed blue gingham dress, her hair properly arranged. Zach had gone to secure rooms at the boarding house and to telegraph the federal marshal in Helena. When Hannah emerged from Mrs. Patterson's back room, she found Zach in conversation with a heavy-set man she recognized as Mr. Donovan, the blacksmith. "Hannah, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, "Mr. Zimmerman has been asking about the Callahan's horses." Mr. Donovan nodded gravely. "I shoe all their horses, miss, and yes, Preston's gelding threw a shoe last week. I replaced it, but it was missing a nail on the right fore." Hannah and Zach exchanged a look of triumph. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was a start. Now what? Hannah asked as they walked toward the boarding house, acutely aware of the curious stares from townsfolk. "Now we build our case," Zach replied, "and we find out who else the Callahans have wronged. Men like that don't start with burning down houses, they work up to it." Over the next 3 days, Hannah discovered sides of her small town she'd never known existed. With Zach by her side, she spoke to farmers and shopkeepers, cowhands and housewives. The story was always the same. The Callahan brothers had been squeezing out smaller ranchers for years, using intimidation and occasionally violence to expand their empire. Why has no one spoken up before? Hannah asked in frustration after yet another conversation with a frightened homesteader who refused to go on record. "Fear's a powerful thing," Zach said as they rode back toward town. "It takes one person willing to stand up first." Hannah realized he was looking at her. "You mean me." "You've got nothing left to lose," he pointed out, "and everything to gain." That evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Hannah studied Zach's profile. In just a few days, this stranger had become someone she trusted implicitly. There was a quiet strength about him, a sense of purpose that drew her. "Why did you really stop at my farm that day?" she asked suddenly. Zach was silent for a long moment. "Truth," Hannah nodded. "I saw the smoke from miles away," he said quietly. "Reminded me of something that happened a long time ago back in Texas. Another farm, another fire." He paused. "I was too late that time, thought maybe this time I could make a difference." Hannah's hand found his on the porch railing. "You did." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Hannah thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. "We've got a big day tomorrow," he said, standing. "The Callahans are due back in town." Word had spread quickly through Pinewood that someone was finally standing up to the Callahan brothers. By mid-morning, when Preston and Wilford Callahan rode into town with their foreman, a small crowd had gathered in the main street. Hannah stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, her heart pounding as she watched the 3 men dismount in front of the saloon. Zach was beside her, his presence reassuring. "That's them?" he asked quietly. Hannah nodded. Preston was the older of the 2, tall and barrel-chested with a bushy mustache and cold eyes. Wilford was shorter but broader, with a perpetual sneer. Their foreman, Jake Mercer, was lean and mean-looking, with a knife scar across one cheek. "And that's Preston's horse," Hannah whispered, pointing to the dappled gray gelding. "The one with the distinctive shoe." Before Zach could respond, Preston Callahan spotted them. His eyes narrowed as he recognized Hannah, then shifted to Zach with obvious assessment. The 3 men conferred briefly before heading toward them. "Well, well," Preston called as they approached. "If it isn't Miss Newsom, heard about your misfortune. Terrible thing, fire." Hannah felt Zach tense beside her but kept her own voice steady. "Wasn't misfortune, Mr. Callahan. Someone set that fire deliberately." Wilford laughed. "Got any proof of that, girlie?" "As a matter of fact," Zach said, his voice calm but carrying, "we do." Preston's gaze hardened as he looked at Zach. "And who might you be, Mr. Zachary Zimmerman, former Texas Ranger?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Preston's face. "Well, Mr. Former Ranger, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Miss Newsom's property lies on Callahan land, always has." "That's a lie," Hannah said, anger making her bold. "My father held legal title to that land for 15 years. "Papers can get lost," Wilford said with a smirk, "or burned." It was an admission as good as any, and they all knew it. A small crowd had gathered, listening to the exchange with tense interest. "Here's what's going to happen," Zach said, his voice carrying to the onlookers. "Miss Newsom is filing formal charges of arson and attempted murder. The federal marshal from Helena will be here tomorrow to investigate. And in the meantime," he added, his hand moving casually to rest near his holster, "she'll be under my protection." Jake Mercer's hand twitched toward his gun, but Preston stopped him with a slight gesture. "You're making a mistake, Ranger," Preston said, his voice low and threatening. "Nobody crosses the Callahans in this country." "Somebody just did," Zach replied evenly. The tension was broken by the arrival of Marshal Thornton, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he pushed through the crowd. "What's going on here?" "Just having a friendly conversation with Miss Newsom and her friend," Preston said smoothly. "No need for concern, Marshal." "Good to hear," Thornton said, clearly relieved. "Don't want any trouble in my town." "There won't be," Zach assured him. "So long as everyone remembers that justice applies to all, even those who think they're above it." The Callahan brothers retreated to the saloon, but the look Preston gave Hannah promised this wasn't over. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah realized she was trembling. "You did well," Zach said quietly, guiding her away from the street. "Real well." "They'll come after us," Hannah whispered. "Tonight, probably," Zach nodded. "I'm counting on it." That evening, Zach gathered a small group of townspeople who had suffered under the Callahan's rule: Mr. Donovan, the blacksmith; Tom Jensen, who'd lost his ranch under suspicious circumstances; and 3 other men who'd finally found the courage to stand up. They set up watch around the boarding house, waiting for the inevitable. Hannah couldn't sleep, instead sitting by her window watching the moonlit street below. Around midnight, she saw a movement: 3 shadows creeping toward the boarding house from different directions. She slipped down the hall to Zach's room, knocking softly. He opened the door immediately, fully dressed and alert. "They're coming," she whispered. Zach nodded, checking his revolver. "Stay here, lock the door behind me." "No," Hannah said firmly. "This is my fight too." For a moment, Zach looked like he might argue, but then his expression softened. "Your father would be proud of you, Hannah Newsom." The words warmed her even as fear chilled her blood. Together, they moved silently downstairs to join the others waiting in the darkened parlor. "3 of them," Mr. Donovan whispered. "Just like you said." "Remember," Zach cautioned, "we want them alive to face justice." The attack came moments later, the front door crashing open as Jake Mercer burst in, gun drawn. Zach moved with lightning speed, knocking Mercer's arm upward as the gun discharged into the ceiling. The 2 men grappled, crashing into furniture as Mr. Donovan and the others rushed to help. Hannah heard a noise from the back of the house and realized the Callahan brothers must be coming in through the kitchen. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and moved toward the rear hall, heart pounding. She arrived just as Wilford Callahan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He froze when he saw her, then smiled coldly. "Well now, Miss Newsom, seems like you're harder to get rid of than we thought." Hannah raised the poker. "Get out of this house." Wilford laughed, advancing toward her. "Or what, you'll hit me with that?" "I don't think." Hannah swung with all her might, catching him on the shoulder. Wilford howled in pain, stumbling backward into his brother who had just entered behind him. "You little wild cat," Preston snarled, shoving his brother aside and reaching for his gun. Before he could draw, a shot rang out from behind Hannah. Preston cried out, clutching his hand as his revolver clattered to the floor. Hannah turned to see Zach in the hallway, his gun still smoking. "That's enough," Zach said, his voice like steel. "It's over, Callahan." By dawn, the Callahan brothers and their foreman were locked in the town jail, with Mr. Donovan standing guard since no one trusted Marshal Thornton to keep them there. The federal marshal would arrive on the afternoon stage, and with multiple witnesses now willing to testify, the Callahan's reign of terror was truly over. Hannah stood on the boarding house porch, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains gold. She heard Zach's familiar footsteps behind her but didn't turn. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Zach leaned on the railing beside her. "Justice happens. The Callahans will stand trial. You'll get compensation for your property." "And you?" Hannah turned to look at him then, searching his face. "Will you still go to Montana?" Zach's eyes held hers for a long moment. "I was thinking about that. The land I was looking at, it's a fair piece north of here. Good water, good grazing, too much for one man to work alone." Hannah's heart quickened. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Zimmerman?" A slow smile spread across Zach's face. "Not exactly, Miss Newsom." He took her hands in his. "We've only known each other a handful of days, so I won't presume to speak of feelings that need time to grow properly." But I will say this, I've never met a woman with more fire in her soul than you. Hannah felt a blush warm her cheeks, and I've never met a man who could see that fire when all I saw were ashes. Perhaps, Zach said softly, we could see where this path leads us, together. As the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, Hannah Newsom realized that from the ashes of her old life, something new and unexpected was taking root. She stood on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to Zach's cheek. I'd like that very much, she whispered. 3 months later, Hannah stood on the porch of a new cabin, watching as Zach worked with the ranch hands to bring in the last of the summer hay. Their property now stretched out before her, green and promising under the vast Montana sky. The Callahan brothers were awaiting trial in Helena, and Hannah had used the settlement money from her old property to invest in this new beginning. The cabin was simple but solid, built with the help of many of the townsfolk who had found their courage once the Callahans' grip on the region was broken. Zach rode toward the cabin now, his face lighting up when he saw her watching. These past months had been a revelation, working side by side, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, building something neither had dared to dream of before. Something smells good, Zach said as he dismounted and climbed the porch steps. Apple pie, Hannah replied. Mrs. Patterson's recipe. Zach's arms slipped around her waist, a familiarity that still sent her heart racing. Have I told you today how remarkable you are, Hannah Newsom? Hannah smiled up at him. Not since breakfast. A terrible oversight, he murmured, bending to kiss her softly. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, Hannah rested her head on Zach's shoulder. I got a letter from the lawyer today, she said. The deed is officially registered in both our names. Zach's arm tightened around her. That's good news. Hannah hesitated, then added, I was thinking, the cabin has plenty of room for the future, I mean. Zach turned to look at her, his eyes questioning. For a family, Hannah clarified, her cheeks warming. Someday. A slow smile spread across Zach's face. Hannah Newsom, are you asking me to marry you? Hannah laughed. I'm suggesting you might want to ask me. In one smooth motion, Zach slid from the bench onto one knee before her. From his pocket, he produced a small gold ring, simple but beautiful. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, he admitted. Hannah, you are the most courageous, determined woman I've ever known. When I found you sitting in those ashes, I never imagined I'd find my heart's desire. Will you marry me? Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. As Zach slipped the ring onto her finger, Hannah remembered that terrible day when she'd lost everything, and the moment this remarkable man had reminded her that sometimes, from the ashes, the brightest fires could rise. The wedding was held that autumn, with the aspen trees turning gold against the mountains. The entire town of Pinewood turned out to celebrate, even Marshal Thornton, who had become decidedly more attentive to justice since the Callahan affair. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears as Hannah walked down the aisle in a dress they had sewn together, carrying wildflowers gathered from the ranch meadows. But it was Zach's face. Hannah watched his eyes filled with a love that still amazed her every day. I take you, Hannah, to be my wife, Zach said, his voice strong and sure. To stand beside you through whatever life brings, to build our dreams together, and to never forget that even in the darkest times, there is fire enough in us both to light the way forward. As winter settled over their Montana home, Hannah and Zach Zimmerman built their life together, not just a ranch, but a haven for those who needed a fresh start. Former homesteaders who had lost land to the Callahans found work with them, and the community grew stronger with each passing season. On cold evenings, they would sit before their hearth, planning for spring plantings and summer cattle drives, for the children they hoped would someday fill their home with laughter. Did you ever imagine, Hannah asked one such night, watching the firelight dance across Zach's beloved face, that a chance encounter by a burning homestead would lead to all this? Zach smiled, drawing her close. Maybe not this exactly. But I knew from the first moment I saw you, even covered in ash and heartbroken, that there was a fire in you that would never go out. He kissed her gently. And that's the kind of fire worth building a life around. Hannah nestled against him, watching the flames leap and dance in the hearth, grateful beyond words for the man who had seen strength in her when she felt only despair, and for the love that had risen, phoenix-like, from the ashes of her old life.